Hi all, today I'm going to be talking to you about toxic textiles, the harmful chemicals hiding in our clothing, and how that relates to Child Environmental Health Day. My name is Charlotte Tate. I'm the Labor Justice Campaigns Director at Green America. So to start off, I wanted to share a little bit about Green America. Our mission is to harness economic power through using the strength of consumers, investors, workers, and businesses to create a socially just and environmentally sustainable society. And when we talk about green, we mean both environmentally responsible and socially just. So Green America achieves our mission through a three-pronged approach. We use consumer education and advocacy campaigns through our Green Business Network, which is a network of small, innovative green businesses. And then through the Center for Sustainable Solutions to achieve supply chain transformation. So we have 6 focus areas: climate, food, finance, labor, social justice, and green living. So let's dig in more onto toxic textiles. To start off, the fashion industry takes a huge toll on people and the planet. The apparel industry uses 43 million tons of chemicals every year. And in addition to that, there are over 8,000 different chemicals used to manufacture clothing. 10% of global carbon emissions come from the fashion industry. Textile manufacturing accounts for 20% of industrial water pollution. And there's a huge amount of wasted clothing. Between 2000 and 2015, clothing production almost doubled from about 50 billion units per year to over 100 billion units per year. During that same time, the amount of clothing that Americans dispose of annually has almost tripled. On average, Americans dispose of 70 pounds of clothing a year. So where does this clothing go? The EPA reports that Americans generate 16 million tons of textile waste a year. On average, 700,000 tons of used clothing gets exported abroad, and 2.5 million tons of clothing is recycled, but over 3 million tons is incinerated, and a staggering 10 million tons get sent to landfills. So how does that break down percentage-wise? Only about 14% of our clothing gets recycled. So how does this all connect to children's environmental health? Children are more susceptible to the health impacts of harmful chemical exposure. Children are still developing and engage with their environment differently than adults. Children are less able to flush toxic chemicals out of their bodies. When comparing exposure to body weight, children take in more food, more water, and more air per pound than adults. So air pollution, tainted resources, and exposure to toxic chemicals can cause more health problems for children than adults. In addition, when you look at clothing, there are residual chemicals present in the piece of clothing that you buy in stores. So children could be exposed to harmful chemicals in clothing manufacturing through that. So what are some chemicals of concern? Polyfluorinated chemicals, or PFCs, are used to make clothing waterproof and stain-proof. Azo dyes are one of the most common dyes used. Heavy metals such as cadmium, lead, and mercury are found in dyes and leather tanning. Formaldehyde is used to keep clothing wrinkle-free and shrink-free. And flame retardants are used to fireproof clothing and especially used in children's clothing. So how does exposure to these chemicals manifest in health concerns? So health effects consist of liver damage, disruption of hormone functions. Some of these chemicals are carcinogens, which can lead to cancer. They can cause damage to the nervous system and respiratory irritation. In addition to children that are buying clothing that may be exposed to harmful chemicals, garment workers also have some negative health impacts from the harmful chemical exposure. So more than 70 million people worldwide are employed by the fashion industry, and 85% are women. Similar to children, women are more susceptible to the negative health impacts of chemical exposure. Globally, there are 170 million children engaged in child labor, with many of these children making clothing. In a recent survey conducted by the Clean Clothes Campaign, 93% of brands are not paying a living wage to workers in their supply chain. And workers can make as little as 15 cents an hour. So since our environmental health is all interconnected, I wanted to talk a little bit about what global worker exposure to toxic chemicals looks like. Occupational diseases kill one worker every 30 seconds. 80% of deaths from unsafe working conditions are a result of occupational disease. 50% of occupational diseases can be attributed to chemical exposure. And communities surrounding garment manufacturing are also at risk, including the children living there. Some waterways near clothing manufacturing are so polluted that they can no longer sustain life. And how I think about this in relation to children's environmental health, this is a resource, a natural resource and a community resource that's being taken away from children. There are also instances of child labor in the production of raw materials that are going into clothing. For example, in some countries, cotton growing relies on child laborers, and growing conventional cotton requires a huge amount of pesticides. So this means the child laborers' health is being put at risk due to pesticide exposure, and that those children living near cotton fields could also be at risk for exposure to pesticides. So a little over a year ago now, we released a report on toxic textiles. And part of that research, we looked at the environmental and social practices of major US apparel companies. We looked at things like their alternative resources usage, their chemical management policy, if they disclose a factory list and what information they disclose there, what information they disclose around factory safety, their water management policies, and waste and recycling. One of the companies that came out at the very bottom is Carter's, who is the largest US retailer of children's clothing. So how does all of this impact you and your children's health? The chemicals used in manufacturing pollute local waterways and communities. Some of the chemicals used in clothing manufacturing are persistent, meaning once the chemicals enter the environment, instead of breaking down, they linger. Persistent chemicals can travel long distances, so those chemicals disposed of improperly on the other side of the world could also taint your and your children's resources. Some chemicals remain present in the final end product, so you and your loved ones can also be exposed to harmful chemicals used in clothing manufacturing. But there's good news. There are lots of ways that you can help reform the industry. So first, the most sustainable thing you can do is buy less clothing. Second, if you are going to get some new clothes, make them just new to you. So shop secondhand, or if you feel comfortable with it, organize and attend clothing swaps. But we also understand sometimes you need to buy new. So you can look for a few things. You can look at Green America's Green Business Network. These are small businesses that prioritize people on the planet, and we have several apparel companies included in that network. There's some sustainability certifications that limit the harmful chemicals that can be used, such as Blue Sign, Okotex, and GOTS. And then on the next slide, I'll talk about some tips to spot a leader, so you can do your own research if your favorite apparel brand is not included in our scorecard. And if one of your favorite clothing brands is doing poorly on chemical management or another issue you care about, let them know that this is an issue you care about. Reach out to them, ask for more details about the issue, ask for them to prioritize this issue going forward. And you can use your purchasing power to shop from more responsible brands. creating a greater demand for ethical apparel companies. And finally, you can take action with Green America. So what are some tips for you to spot a leader? You can look for companies that are measuring their waste impacts, incorporating more recycling and recycled products in their supply chain. Look for companies that are taking part in industry initiatives to help standardize information tracking. Look for companies that have chemical management policies and share those policies. Do they have public manufacturing restricted substances lists? So limiting what harmful chemicals workers can be exposed to in the manufacturing? Or do they have a public restricted substances list? So limiting the harmful chemicals that can be present in the end product that consumers buy? Or are they taking part in industry initiatives to phase out the most dangerous chemicals? Does the company have a water treatment plan that they share so they can help clean up the water that's discharged? Do they share goals, benchmarks, metrics to incorporate more sustainable textiles into their supply chains? And it's important that these initiatives are not limited to just one line of clothing, but applied across the board to all of their products. And then are they transparent about their labor practices and who and where clothing was made? And I would encourage you to do your own research. Maybe chemical management isn't the most important issue to you, but many of these tips are applicable to other issues. And remember, if a company isn't sharing information about an issue or only sharing vague commitments, this is typically a red flag. When companies are doing good work, they want to share it with consumers. And please remember, when consumers speak, companies listen. So reach out to companies about issues you care about, ask for more details, ask how they're going to address it. And conversely, if they are doing really well on an issue you care about, you can also reach out to them and let them know that you're glad that they're prioritizing this and that you hope they do going forward. So you can, as I mentioned, you can also take action with Green America. Earlier this year, Carter's disclosed a restricted substances list. This was due in part to the efforts of Green America and a bunch of individuals just like yourselves that took action asking Carter's to disclose a restricted substances list. However, we are asking they go one step further and disclose a manufacturing restricted substances list so that we know that workers aren't being exposed to harmful chemicals as well. And we also have an action relevant to COVID-19. As COVID spread across the world, many apparel companies canceled orders. And for some of these orders, the products were already made, or the supplies were already purchased, or workers had already completed some work for those orders. And so this has resulted in workers not getting paid for work they already completed. So we're asking 8 US companies to pay up. I will put links to both of these actions in the comments. So please take them and share them with your friends and family if you would like. So I wanted to talk a little bit briefly about some of the other work that Green America does in case it interests you. So over the years, we've had campaigns against all of these companies listed, and we've had success thanks to consumers like yourselves that took action, reached out to companies, took our actions, shared it on social media. Recently, we had a petition asking Home Depot and Lowe's to stop selling cancer-causing Roundup. So as I mentioned earlier, the use of pesticides also jeopardizes children's environmental health. We also have a campaign on climate victory gardens. We have loads of resources online about how to get started with a climate victory garden, if you're anywhere from a beginner gardener to a master gardener. We also have tips on how to get your children involved with gardening. We currently have a campaign asking Amazon to respect workers' rights and the environment. Amazon takes a huge toll on the environment and has many reports of worker abuses in its supply chain. So we provide alternatives to Amazon and actions you can take. We have another campaign focusing on ending child labor in cocoa production. So in some West African countries where most of the cocoa beans that are grown for chocolate, there's a high prevalence of child labor. So we're asking big chocolate companies to step it up and end child labor in cocoa. So if you go to Green America, you can see how big brands stand up against each other. We provide ethical alternatives. Yeah. And then finally, we also have green living tips, many of which are applicable to children's health or the health of your home. So we have content such as green back to school supplies, how to choose safe toys and gifts for your babies, how to detox your home, safer alternatives to cleaning products. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. I'd be happy to answer it. Thanks for joining us on Child Environmental Health Day. And please go to greenamerica.org to learn more about our work. Thank you so much.